couple of years, he had quite a few, about 200 acres of land cleared
Okay.
by these 28 people who
Right.
were so good. But de Chazal was really very nice to them. He really treated them very well. He gave them some quarters to stay and little plots of land for their own families and so on.
Right.
Because by then, some of these workers married some African women,
Okay.
slaves from
Right.
Africa.
Right.
So, well, this was creating some problems, but it got sorted out.
Right.
There was no problem as such.
Right.
And it became a very good example.
Right.
Then finally in 1822 or 23, there was abolition of the bar. Then there was a question of 1828 to treat the slaves better in the countries all around the world by the Britishers. Then in 1833, finally slavery was abolished.
Okay.
And then at that point of time, the British Treasury paid out 20 million pounds sterlings to various people around the world to free their slaves. And in Mauritius, they paid about 2 million pounds sterlings, over 2 million pounds sterlings.
Okay. Traditionally, all migrations have a pull and a push factor. So yes, there was a economic pull from the French. They wanted to expand the economy. But what were the factors, the push factor within India? What were the economic conditions that made these people take a decision to look for better opportunities?
Well, as you know, that India was under the rules of the Muslims for about 600 years, and
Right.
of the British, they were an oppressed lot,
Right.
and there was a lot of poverty, and then there was a lot of famines,
Right.
and situations were not so good for getting jobs and so on. But actually,
Were these famines also man-made or artificial?
yes, eventually they became artificial, but that was much later on.
Right.
That was not in the initial stages.
And which parts of the country suffered the most?
Oh, it was all over, all over. It was fantastic, the amount of research work that I have done and reported on the famines and the number of deaths and all in my books is incredible.
Okay.
But what actually motivated and started this indentured labor system was the French. The French planters in Mauritius decided to write the contracts, the terms of the contracts.
Okay.
And they sent their agents to India, and they asked the East India Company for permission to take these people out from 1834.
Okay.
And mostly it was the Dangars people from the hill tribes and all who went, but they were not good workers.
Okay.
But the efforts continued, and they ill-treated these people in Mauritius and treated them on the same level as the slaves. And it was a question of perpetuation of slavery under another garb.
Right.
But with the protests of people around the world saying that people are being ill-treated in Mauritius, the East India Company put an embargo on
Sending of
immigration in 1837-38. Now, unfortunately, by that time there were a few thousands of people in Mauritius, and there it created great trouble because there were no women, and the men who went from India would not take their women. So that created a massive amount of trouble. In the course of from 1834 to 1839, in spite of the embargo, people went to Mauritius in 1837, 38, 39, and like the governor would write, at that time it was Nicolay, he would say, how can I stop them when they have already arrived from different other ports and so on. And I think that at that point of time, there were 500 women only in Mauritius, and all of them were from the streets, streetwalkers.
Oh, okay.
They were prostitutes who were taken there and all that, so that created trouble. Okay. But actually, indentured labor started by the French planters from Mauritius.
You just mentioned that there was a large number of recruitments by the French between 1834 and 1839. What were the conditions under which these people traveled? It would be interesting to know that.
Oh, there were no conditions. There are no records either. I met somebody in Mauritius who said he wants to do his PhD on that period of time of emigration. I said, you will get no materials at all. I've tried my level best to get materials on that period. But in the reports that was compiled by Mr. J.P. Grant in 1842, which he submitted to the Parliament in England, it is a report, very, very long report, exhaustive report. There they mentioned that the people were sent in cargo ships.
Okay.
So they were made to sleep on bags of rice. There was salt also carried at the same time there. There was no question of a proper diet. There was nothing regulated. They were just taken like cattle. They were just taken like slaves. Okay. And if, of course, this came into the limelight, and but they were very badly treated.
And these carriers were mostly French flag?
No, they were mostly carriers of any ship that was carrying cargo. Okay. Any ship that was carrying cargo going towards that direction, they would say, okay, we are sending 30 people. Okay. We are sending 36. The first one went, there were 36 people. Right. So these 36 people were from the Chota Nagpur area, the hill dangars. Right. And so you don't sort of charter a ship to carry 36 people. Okay. Because eventually when the whole thing came under the regulated system, right. So they would, you know, at the same time, at that time, you must remember, there were no depot. Right. They were not housed in any particular place. So right. The agents used to put them and lock them up also in their houses everywhere, okay. So they won't run away. Because crossing the seven seas became a very difficult situation. Right. And once they knew they were going to be taken in a ship and they were going to cross the seven seas or whatever they called it, right. They would lose their caste, they would refuse to go. So these people were locked up in various houses. Right. There was no depot, there was no control, there was no sanitation, there was nothing at all.
You just mentioned the period between 1834 to 39. And I understand that in 1842, there was a regulated system. What is the major difference between these two periods that you have found during your research?
In 1842, December precisely, when the embargo was lifted, the East India Company started having the Colonial Emigration Acts. And there the conditions of how and where the people were going to be sent, it was Mauritius to start with, and nowhere else. And there was one ship that went to British Guyana, Demerara, in 1838, and the people came back in 1843. Okay. But that was again under unregulated. 400 people went, okay. And some of them came back. And the records of the money they brought back and all is there in the archives, okay. And how they came back and how they got this encouragement to go further. But the system started getting under regulation of the Colonial Emigration Acts, which said that only a ship has to be chartered for sending about 250 emigrants at one time. Mm-hmm. And the contracts has to be written. But unfortunately, the contracts that the East India Company wrote down was a repetition of what the French wrote. And they just added a few more.